In 2007, Nokia was untouchable. They controlled 40% of the entire global mobile phone market. One out of every two phones on Earth was a Nokia. Their brand was worth more than Coca-Cola. Their engineers were building the future. Their CEO was on the cover of every business magazine that mattered. And then a man in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage in San Francisco. He held up a small glass rectangle. He said 4 words. One more thing. And Nokia began to die. Within 6 years, a company worth $250 billion was sold for $7.2 billion. A 97% collapse. This is not a story about technology. This is a story about what happens when a giant forgets how to be afraid. Welcome to the Vesper Lab. It starts in 1865, not with a phone or with a screen, but with paper. A Finnish engineer named Fredrik Idestam builds a wood pulp mill on the banks of the Nokia River in southern Finland. He calls his company Nokia. For the next 100 years, Nokia makes paper, then rubber, then cables, then boots, then televisions. Nokia was not born as a tech company. Nokia was born as a survivor. Every decade, they looked at the world and asked one question. What does the world need now? That question would eventually make them kings. By the 1980s, Nokia had moved into telecommunications. Finland was one of the first countries in the world to build a mobile network, and Nokia was right there, building the phones, building the infrastructure, building the future. By 1992, Nokia made a decision that would change everything. They sold the rubber division. They sold the TV division. They sold the boots. They focused on one thing only: mobile phones. It was a terrifying bet, but it paid off beyond anyone's imagination. In 1998, Nokia becomes the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer, not biggest in Europe, not biggest in Scandinavia, on Earth. The Nokia 3310 launches in the year 2000. 126 million units sold. People didn't just use Nokia phones, they loved them, they named them, they drew on them. They dropped them downstairs and laughed when they survived. There were jokes that Nokia phones could survive nuclear explosions. People still make those jokes today, because that's how deep the loyalty ran. Nokia understood something that most companies never figure out. Build something people trust, and they will never look for a replacement. By 2003, Nokia's market value hits $245 billion. Their headquarters in Espoo, Finland employs 24,000 people. They fund research labs across Europe, America, and Asia. They employ more engineers than any tech company on the planet. And here is the part that will shock you. Nokia saw the smartphone coming. They weren't blind. They weren't sleeping. They built a prototype touchscreen smartphone in 1996, 11 years before the iPhone. They had the technology, they had the talent, they had the resources. What they didn't have was the courage to destroy themselves before someone else did. There is a concept in business called the innovator's dilemma. It was written about by a Harvard professor named Clayton Christensen. The idea is simple and brutal. Successful companies die not because they fail to innovate. They die because they succeed too well at what they already do. Nokia was making billions selling simple phones. Every department was optimized for that one product. Every bonus was tied to that one product. Every meeting, every strategy, every quarterly report was built around selling more of the same phone. When engineers inside Nokia started proposing radical new ideas, touchscreens, app ecosystems, internet-first design, the executives nodded politely. And then they went back to selling the same phone. Because it still worked. Because the numbers were still good. Because fear wears a very comfortable mask. It calls itself caution, but what it really means is, we are too comfortable to change. Nokia had a software platform called Symbian. It was the operating system inside their phones. In 2007, it powered 65% of all smartphones on the planet. But Symbian was old. It was built for a world without touchscreens. It was built for buttons, for scroll wheels, for a phone that knew nothing about apps or the internet. Nokia's engineers knew this. They raised the alarm internally. They wrote reports. They presented slides. They said, Symbian cannot compete with what is coming. The executives heard the reports, and then they asked the same question they always asked. But are we still profitable? And the answer was still yes, so nothing changed. January 9th, 2007. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage at the Macworld conference in San Francisco. He says something that no one in the audience fully understands yet. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. The Nokia executives watched the live stream from Finland, and what they said next would haunt the company forever. They laughed. One senior executive reportedly called the iPhone a niche product for American consumers. Another said the battery life was too short. Another pointed out that it had no physical keyboard. They weren't wrong about those things, but they were wrong about everything that mattered. Because Steve Jobs was not selling a phone with a better keyboard. He was selling a computer in your pocket. He was selling the internet in your hand. He was selling a new way of existing in the world. And Nokia was still calculating how many seconds it took to send a text message. In 2008, Google launches Android, free, open source. Any phone manufacturer in the world can use it. Samsung uses it, HTC uses it, LG uses it. The entire industry begins building on Android. Nokia keeps Symbian, because they've invested too much to walk away, because their engineers have built careers around it, because admitting Symbian was finished meant admitting that years of decisions were wrong. And powerful people rarely admit they are wrong, not until the building is already burning. In 2010, Nokia's global market share drops from 40% to 33%. The executives call it a temporary adjustment. 2011, it drops to 25%. Now they panic. Nokia's board makes a desperate move. They hire a new CEO from the outside, an American, a former Microsoft executive. His name is Stephen Elop. He becomes the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history. Elop arrives and reads the internal reports. He sees the full picture for the first time. And he does something remarkable. He writes a memo to the entire company. It becomes one of the most famous internal documents in business history. He calls it the Burning Platform Memo. It reads, "There is a pertinent story about a man who was working on an oil platform in the North Sea. He woke up one night from a loud explosion. In mere moments his world was on fire. He had a choice, stand on the burning platform and wait, or jump into the freezing water 30 meters below. He jumped. We too must jump." The memo was honest. It was brave. It was exactly what Nokia needed to hear. But what came next was the wrong jump. Elop announces that Nokia will abandon Symbian. The industry holds its breath. Will Nokia finally build their own modern operating system? Will they adopt Android like everyone else? The answer is neither. Nokia announces a partnership with Microsoft. They will use Windows Phone, an operating system that had zero momentum, zero apps, zero consumer excitement. The day the announcement is made, Nokia's stock drops 14% in a single session. Developers who were building apps for Nokia's platform immediately stop. Why build for a dying system when they're switching anyway? And why build for Windows Phone when no one is using it? The app ecosystem collapses before the new phones even arrive. Here is what makes this decision so tragic. Nokia had internally developed their own operating system. It was called MeeGo. It was modern. It was fast. It was ready. They launched exactly one phone on MeeGo, the Nokia N9. Technology journalists loved it. Consumers loved it. And then Nokia killed it. To use Windows Phone. It is one of the most devastating business decisions ever made. Like a man escaping a burning building and choosing to run directly into the fire next door. In 2012, Nokia's credit rating is downgraded to junk status. The company that once employed 132,000 people begins mass layoffs. Factories close across Finland, Hungary, Romania. In their hometown of Salo, Nokia shuts down the local plant. An entire town built around Nokia loses its reason to exist. 2013. Microsoft acquires Nokia's mobile phone division for $7.2 billion. A company once worth $245 billion, sold for less than 3% of its peak value. Microsoft tries to resurrect the brand. It fails. By 2015, Microsoft writes off $7.6 billion on the acquisition, more than they paid for it. The Nokia phone is dead, and the world barely notices, because by then, everyone has already moved on. Most people watch this story and blame the iPhone. They blame Steve Jobs. They blame bad timing. But here's the truth. Nokia didn't fall because of the iPhone. Nokia fell because of fear. Not the fear of failure, the fear of success disrupting itself. They had the technology, they had the engineers, they had the resources, they had the warning signs. They had a decade to respond. What they didn't have was the willingness to kill their best product before someone else killed it for them. Nokia was making billions from simple phones. Every dollar they made was a reason not to change. Every profitable quarter was a vote to stay comfortable. And comfort is the most expensive thing a business can ever afford. Because by the time the numbers start falling, it is already too late to build something new. The engineers who tried to sound the alarm were ignored. Not because the executives were stupid, but because humans are wired to protect what works, even when it is already dead. There is a principle the wealthiest builders in the world understand. Obsolete yourself before the market does. Amazon destroyed its own retail model by building Amazon Prime. Apple killed the iPod by building the iPhone. Netflix killed its DVD business by building streaming. They didn't wait for a competitor to make them irrelevant. They made themselves irrelevant first, and then they rebuilt on top of the ruins. Nokia had every chance to do the same thing, and they chose comfort instead. You might be watching this thinking about a business you're building, or a skill you're relying on, or a strategy that's working well right now. And if something is working, that feeling of comfort is exactly when you should be most afraid. Because the market doesn't care about your history. It doesn't reward your loyalty. It only moves toward whoever gives it something better. And if that's not you, it will be someone else. The greatest threat to every successful business in the world is not a better competitor. It is the inability to imagine a world where you no longer exist. Nokia couldn't imagine it, so the world imagined it for them. Don't let the world write your ending. This is the Vesper Lab. We don't just study the fall. We study what to do before the fall begins.